truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Monday, September 16th, 2024, the 1336th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening through a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month. And in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack. And you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin. And you feel better about precious metals? I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company. And that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. All right, everybody. So we are going to get started today with Trump assassination event number 2. And so let's just get into it, getting the official story from the paper of record, the old gray lady, the New York Times. What we know about the apparent assassination attempt against Trump. So what do you notice right away? Apparent assassination attempt. Was it an assassination attempt We don't really know yet. The New York Times won't say that it was, but they can't say for sure. So right now, it's apparent. And by the way, this article is from this morning, September 16th, 2024, at 2:30 Eastern Time. The FBI is investigating what it says appears to have been another attempt to assassinate former President Donald J. Trump. His campaign said he was unharmed in the episode on Sunday, which took place at his golf club in West Palm Beach, Florida, just over 2 months after an assassination attempt on Mr. Trump at a rally in Butler, PA. Officials said Secret Service personnel fired on a suspect who was armed with a rifle and hiding in bushes around the club. The suspect fled and he was caught shortly after that and taken into custody, according to officials. Here's what we know. And of course, that heading is not accurate. No one knows anything about this. We have been told a story by various sources, online, on television, and in the print media. People have done background research on various characters in this story, but every single aspect of this should be considered an unknown. A Secret Service agent was ahead of Mr. Trump on the golf course when the agent spotted a rifle barrel sticking out of the fence around the golf club at around 1:30 p.m. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw of Palm Beach County said at a news conference. The Secret Service fired at the man holding the rifle, who fled on foot and got into a black Nissan. It was not clear whether the suspect fired any shots. Mr. Trump returned to Mar-a-Lago, his residence and private club, according to a person briefed on the situation, and his campaign office in West Palm Beach was locked down and secured. The FBI said it was investigating the incident as an apparent assassination attempt on the former president, who Sheriff Bradshaw said was about 400 yards away from the suspect. Law enforcement officials are seeking to determine who bought the gun and where it was sold. Gosh, yeah, important stuff. I bet we're going to hear it's from Ukraine or Iran. We were initially told, by the way, that the shooter was 500 yards away. Now he's 400. At the scene, investigators found a semi-automatic rifle with a scope and 2 backpacks containing ceramic tile hung on the fence. They also found a video camera and believe the suspect may have planned to film the shooting, and that's the story. There was a GoPro among his things that I suppose we are to assume he was going to put on so that he could film the shooting. Assassination event number 1 in Butler, PA was on live on the internet. And apparently this was meant to be filmed and broadcast as well. But you got to keep it fresh. You can't just have the rally footage over and over again. You got to change scenery. Mr. Trump spoke with friends and allies throughout the afternoon and joked about wishing he had been able to finish his golf game. So he's not too concerned. What is known about the suspect? Law enforcement officials identified the subject as Ryan Wesley Routh, 58. Mr. Routh was interviewed by the New York Times for a March 2023 article about American volunteers who traveled to Ukraine to support the war effort against Russia. Mr. Routh, described as a former construction worker from Greensboro, North Carolina, said he was trying to recruit Afghan soldiers who fled the Taliban to fight in Ukraine. And that's strange, isn't it? I mean, Ukraine is fully a regime-oriented effort. Ryan Routh obviously on that side of things. So if the Afghan soldiers who fled the Taliban were going to join that cause in Ukraine, you would think that they would be regime-aligned too. So regime-aligned Afghan soldiers were fleeing the Taliban. That means they must have been enemies of the Taliban, which means that the Taliban would then be fighting the regime. The Taliban shut down Afghanistan's opium trade in June 2023. So who would that mean was running Afghanistan's opium trade? That would seem once again to be the regime. Now, for many years, Afghanistan was the world's largest producer of opium. And we were told that all of that opium would go to the black market and was not actually sold to Big Pharma, who would then use it to produce various pharmaceutical forms of opium. It all went to the black market. It was not being used by regime-aligned Big Pharma producers. We are supposed to believe that. And it just also happens to be true that fentanyl, a synthetic version, just happened to have exploded worldwide in the last few years. But I digress. Let's get back to the New York Times and their outstanding coverage of Ryan Routh and Trump assassination event number 2. They say a man with the same name and similar age as Mr. Routh, was arrested in 2002 in Greensboro, North Carolina, after barricading himself inside a building with a fully automatic weapon, according to the Greensboro News and Record newspaper. The newspaper said the man was charged with carrying a concealed weapon and possession of a fully automatic machine gun. It's not clear how the charges were resolved. The Times has since updated their reporting. Adam Goldman writing, federal court documents show that the suspect was convicted of a felony in December 2002 for, quote, possessing a weapon of mass death and destruction, end quote. I did not know that was actually a charge. I wonder if he is the reason that they were unable to find WMD in Iraq. Ryan Routh smuggled them out of the country and into Greensboro, North Carolina. Sheriff William D. Snyder of Martin County, Florida, said that when his deputies arrested the suspect in the shooting, he was, quote, not displaying a lot of emotions, end quote, and was not armed when taken from his vehicle. The New York Times then reaffirms the official story about Assassination Event number 1, and the next heading is, what are new questions about the Secret Service? Sunday's apparent assassination attempt quickly raised new questions about the agency's ability to protect candidates. Certainly, a second serious incident, apparently involving an assault weapon, is deeply alarming and appalling, said Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat from Connecticut and the chairman of the Senate subcommittee investigating security failures at Butler. Here's what Blumenthal had to say Thursday after receiving a classified private briefing on what really happened in Butler, PA.
I think the American people are going to be shocked, astonished, and appalled by what we will report to them about the failures by the Secret Service in this assassination attempt on the former president. But I think they also ought to be appalled and astonished by the failure of the Department of Homeland Security to be more forthcoming, to be as candid and frank as it should be to them in terms of providing information. And we are going to absolutely insist on the truth and the whole truth in documents and testimony as members of the United States Senate, but also as citizens.
What did you learn new today when you said they're going to be appalled? What specifically?
I'm not going to go into what we have learned in specifics. I'm giving you my reaction, and we will have a report very, very soon that I think will absolutely shock the American people, or it should, about the lapses and lags in the protection that was afforded that day and the breakdown in communication, failure and responsibility.
Is that report coming today or tomorrow?
I'm sorry?
Is that report coming out tonight or tomorrow?
No.
So essentially, Blumenthal says, I know something you don't know, blames the Secret Service and Department of Homeland Security, and says that Americans will be shocked, or at least they should be. He wants them to be, but he can't tell us what it is. The report's coming out soon, but who knows how soon. You see, it's all classified. He's just giving us his feelings. And I, for one, am thankful that we have these totally untrustworthy people to tell us what they've learned in secret from other totally untrustworthy people. The New York Times has now let us know that this very person believes that a second serious incident with an assault weapon is deeply alarming and appalling. Well, hey, Richard, why don't you tell us what happened in the first one, since you're claiming to know, and since you're claiming that it's important and that we'll be shocked by it, why aren't you telling us? As at Butler, the circumstances on Sunday appeared to involve a security breach around the perimeter of Trump's location. The apparent assassination attempt took place on the golf course at the Trump International Golf Club, a facility Mr. Trump owns that is about 5 miles west of Mar-a-Lago. The attempted gunman hid in the bushes at the edge of the course, officials said, similar to how the gunman in Butler found a spot on a rooftop outside the event's security perimeter. Are those really similar things? I don't know. Sheriff Bradshaw said that the size of Mr. Trump's security detail is smaller than it would have been if he were a sitting president. So, if he was actually the real president, he would have allowed way more of these clowns to be around him. 11 New York Times reporters contributed to that report. Times reporter Glenn Thrush writes, the 8-page criminal complaint against the suspect in what authorities have described as an apparent assassination attempt of Donald Trump makes no mention of whether he fired his weapon, only that a Secret Service agent fired after seeing the barrel of the gun poking through the bushes on the edge of Trump's golf course. The charges are, to an extent, preliminary. The Justice Department's National Security Division, which is responsible for investigating and prosecuting assassination attempts, is taking a central role in the case and could bring additional, more serious charges in the coming weeks, according to two officials familiar with the situation. The New York Post may have been first out of the gate with this story, and that may come into play at some point. We'll discuss that later. Their headline was Trump safe and well after being targeted by would-be assassin with scoped AK-47 just a few hundred yards away while ex-prez played golf. This article has been updated at least once since it was published. Former President Donald Trump survived yet another assassination attempt after a sniper with a scoped AK-47 rifle got within a few hundred yards of him as he played golf at his West Palm Beach, Florida club on Sunday. It's the second time a madman armed with an assault rifle has tried to kill the 45th president in 2 months. Now, it's worth noting that, according to the official story, Thomas Matthew Crooks, the young man who was probably invented out of nothing and blamed for assassination attempt number 1, was using an AR-15, which is not an assault rifle. It also doesn't exactly sound right to call a guy with an AK-47 a sniper just because the AK-47 has a scope on it. But hey, I'm sure these guys are excellent reporters. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw said the suspect took cover near a chain link fence. Taking cover near a chain link fence. It makes me think of that meme back in the days of the COVID mask where people would talk about how using a COVID mask to protect yourself from a virus is like using a chain link fence to protect yourself from mosquitoes. The Post says that Routh was between 300 and 500 yards from Trump as he teed off at the 5th hole around 2 p.m., noting that with a rifle and scope, like, that's not a long distance. It's according to Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw. Law enforcement sources told the Post that the suspect is Ryan Routh, a 58-year-old Hawaii resident who has championed progressive causes online and was a reliable donor to Democrat causes and candidates. It's weird that the New York Times didn't mention that. His LinkedIn page shows that he attended North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, but relocated to Hawaii sometime around 2018. He describes himself on the page as mechanically minded and claims work has never been about money, rather building frameworks for people to thrive and succeed. According to the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction, somebody with Routh's same full name and date of birth racked up more than a dozen criminal charges in 2001 and 2002, including for carrying a concealed weapon and hit and run. He also picked up a particularly alarming felony in April 2002 for possessing a weapon of mass destruction, records show. And you got to love how the mainstream media is dutifully disseminating the official story, while apparently each having gotten slightly different versions. On Sunday, the accused wannabe assassin set up a GoPro camera on the fence with the apparent intent of recording the shooting, part of a full-fledged sniper's nest that he orchestrated in the hedges at the edge of the Trump International Golf Course, where he was lying in wait for Trump to come into view. The Post notes that Sheriff Bradshaw said that if Donald Trump were sitting president, the whole golf course would be surrounded, but he's not the current president, so they had much lighter security. Let's skip ahead. Following the Butler, PA rally shooting, the Secret Service also demanded that Trump hold all future outdoor campaign events from behind bulletproof glass. And that has started happening. He doesn't stay behind that glass. But along the same lines, people online began pushing the notion that Donald Trump should just stay put, stay in Mar-a-Lago. Don't go out. Don't hold these events. Don't even go play golf Just stay inside forever, or at least until this very real election is over. Routh's arrest was given a big boost by a bystander who spotted him running out of the bushes and getting into a black Nissan, even photographing the man and reporting the sighting to law enforcement, who then blasted it out statewide, leading to his arrest after a stop on I-95 a short time later. And I do hope we get to find out more about that man. Thank goodness that there was a real eyewitness. Investigators found the suspect had left behind his AK-style rifle as well as 2 backpacks, one of which contained ceramic tile at the scene, Bradshaw said. And yeah, for sure, anyone who realizes they just got caught about to assassinate the president is going to leave their gun and flee without it. You're willing to kill the president, but don't want to kill any officers in self-defense. You're willing to shoot the President of the United States of America, but then allow yourself to be taken peacefully. That's hard to believe, but hey, the news has said it, and therefore, since I can't prove that's not the case, we have to assume it's true. Routh has been in the news before. A vocal Ukraine supporter, he spoke to Newsweek Romania in 2022 about volunteering to help recruit for Ukraine forces in its war against Russia, and to semaphore a year later, expressing frustration over Ukraine's unwillingness to enlist foreign soldiers. Ukraine is often very hard to work with, he said. Many foreign soldiers leave after a week in Ukraine or must move on from unit to unit to find a place they are respected and appreciated. Man, we should send those Ukrainian Nazis a few $1 billion for feminist dance therapy and see if maybe they'll be a little more inclusive and respectful after that. Routh's gal pal, Kathleen Schaefer, who lived in Hawaii with him, wrote about his time in Kyiv on social media. My fiance put his life at home on hold and traveled to Kyiv in April to support the people of Ukraine. He plans on staying for at least 90 days and stays at a hostel with a military unit, Schaefer wrote on Facebook. Routh set up a memorial for Ukrainians killed in the war, set up an international volunteer center, and arranged deliveries of tactical gear to soldiers on the front lines, Schaefer said. Trump issued an alert statement to let supporters know he was safe shortly after the terrifying incident. There were gunshots in my vicinity, but before rumors start spiraling out of control, I wanted you to hear this first. I am safe and well, he wrote Sunday. Trump spokesman Stephen Chung added, President Trump is safe following gunshots in his vicinity. No further details at this time. The suspect was arrested by local police a short time later on I-95 at Florida's Route 714, about 41 miles north in Palm City. Fox News host Sean Hannity said he spoke to Trump several times after the ordeal, and that once the former president was safe, he told him, I really wanted to finish the hole. I was even, and I had a birdie putt. The article also notes that Senator Lindsey Graham took to X, formerly Twitter, minutes after the news of the shooting broke to laud the former president for his fortitude. Just spoke with President Trump. He is one of the strongest people I've ever known. He's in good spirits, and he is more resolved than ever to save our country. So as this story was rolling out yesterday, we basically got it from 3 places. It was the New York Post, Sean Hannity, and Lindsey Graham, all mentioned in this article. And of course, they are. The New York Post is a Murdoch newspaper. Fox News, of course, is a Murdoch television network. And Lindsey Graham is a fully owned subsidiary of the global regime and the Uniparty right establishment in Washington, D.C. for decades. Now, is Lindsey Graham doing something behind the scenes? Has he been flipped? Is he now controlled by the good guys? Hey, maybe. Anything's possible, but that's a guess. What we have observed is that Lindsey Graham is one of the biggest warmongers in the country and absolutely a tool of the military-industrial complex and the neocon establishment. The Post includes reactions from the fake President Joe Biden and the fake Vice President Kamala Harris. Biden issued a statement hours after the incident. A suspect is in custody, and I commend the work of the Secret Service and their law enforcement partners for their vigilance and their efforts to keep the former president and those around him safe. I have directed my team to continue to ensure that Secret Service has every resource, capability, and protective measure necessary to ensure the former president's continued safety. Comrade Kamala said, "I am deeply disturbed by the possible assassination attempt of former President Trump today. As we gather the facts, I will be clear. I condemn political violence. We must all do our part to ensure that this incident does not lead to more violence." And that's about as insincere as any statement could possibly be. Kamala Harris encouraged the rioters in Minneapolis to be set free so they could go riot again. She helped raise money for their cause. She talked about how the street action will continue and it should continue on Stephen Colbert. And what does she mean by we all must do our part to ensure that there is no further violence? Well, that means that she can call everything she doesn't like violent rhetoric and then attempt to silence it while gradually shifting the blame back on to Trump and his supporters for violence directed at Trump and his supporters. MSNBC is being straightforward with it.
Do you expect there to be calls from within the Trump campaign to do that? Because he's going to reach out to his supporters and say, let's take this down. We do not know, again, the source of any gunshot or gunshots. We don't know who's responsible for this. The whole thing has yet to be 100% confirmed from start to finish how this all played out. But do you expect to hear anything from the Trump campaign about toning down the rhetoric, toning down the violence, or would that be atypical of the former president?
Well, Alex, remember back to the assassination attempt on President Trump's life and how, there was talk of a new tone, and then the Republican convention was, by Trumpian standards, muted. And it did seem like he was, just trying to take it down a few notches. But then by the end of his convention speech, we were kind of back to where we started. So I don't know how long this could, this moment of unity for the country where we come together and we say, I don't want any political opposition to be under threat of violence. It's not okay, any threat of violence, we don't want. I would love for us to have a unity type moment, but I think it's probably going to be pretty fleeting, as we've seen in the past.
And quite a bit of the coverage has included that same notion. Donald Trump had toned down his rhetoric for a few days after the first attempt, but then went off the reservation in his speech at the Republican National Convention, proving that he had learned nothing, as if he was supposed to learn the lesson. And the lesson was that Donald Trump needs to shut up. They're saying they hope he learns it this time, and his supporters do as well. Even people on the so-called right are suggesting that. And it's amazing. All of the people who have wanted Donald Trump to shut up for 9 years want Donald Trump to shut up again. Here's Morning Mika and Morning Joe and some of their friends. My pal, The Storm Has Arrived 17 clipped this together this morning.
There has been violence. The rhetoric has become more violent. And I'm certainly open to people giving us examples of Kamala Harris or Joe Biden saying things like this, that Donald Trump said, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs should be executed, that he could assassinate his political rivals using SEAL Team 6, constantly mocking and ridiculing the savage attack against Paul Pelosi, calling for people to go up and protest on January 6th and to be strong, starting those riots, and telling the Proud Boys to stand back and to stand by. Yes, there has been an increase of violence. Donald Trump telling people in his audience to beat the hell out of any protesters or people they disagree with, and he will pay for their legal funds. The amount of violent rhetoric coming from one side really is unprecedented in modern American politics. You see this in the campaign as well, where Donald Trump will do something outrageous, and then we'll hear on the other side, yeah, well, Kamala Harris, she's only done one interview with a Philadelphia station. And you're like, wait, you're starting violence against Haitians and immigrants, legal immigrants, and you're comparing that to how many interviews Kamala Harris. But that's the sort of false moral equivalency we seem to be living with these days.
If this is not a comedy routine designed to wake people up, these are the stupidest and most immoral people maybe who've ever lived. Every instance Joe Scarborough just brought up was either a hoax, a direct lie, an example of intentionally taking Trump out of context, or something Trump didn't even say. That whole thing about SEAL Team 6, that was a hypothetical argument used by Trump's attorneys in the Supreme Court case over presidential immunity. These people are insane. A bit more.
At the same time, Donald Trump is putting in real danger Haitians and blacks in Springfield and we've seen the bomb threats and all already there, by him saying they're eating people's pets.
But it's Donald Trump who trolls in the rhetoric, this incendiary rhetoric that often has violent imagery. He's been doing it on our national political stage for nearly a decade, and many times is given an opportunity to speak out against violence and chooses not to.
So Donald Trump is threatening the lives of blacks and Haitians by pointing out that Haitian illegal aliens in Springfield, Ohio, are eating the dogs and the cats of the people who live there, and also the geese and ducks in the pond. And they might be doing animal sacrifices and voodoo rituals, which is a common practice in Haiti. And over time, I think we'll see that between the voodoo and the cannibalism we heard about 6 months ago, we are a few stories away from this reaching the Clintons and human trafficking and slaves and gold mines. These people are talking about false equivalencies and comparing potential violence that might come to Haitian illegal aliens and black people in general because of Trump's comments last week at the debate with actually being shot at. The last guy, who I think is named Jonathan Lemire, sounds like a whiny tattletale. Trump trolls with incendiary rhetoric and often violent imagery, and we've all had to deal with this for like 9 years. The argument is basically that sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt you. Although words can absolutely lead to sticks and stones, and even though they haven't yet and probably won't, we should assume they're the same thing. And this isn't about Democrat, Republican. It's not about right and left. This is about the evil twin faction in the United States, a part of that global regime here embedded in our culture. Some of them, friends, family, acquaintances, coworkers. I understand people might bristle at the framing. It just happens to be true. People support different things. We all have people we know, people in our lives who are very committed servants of the Uniparty, very committed servants of the global regime, and fully support its agenda. Claims of violence, claims of atrocities, claims of harassment, claims that one side is saying all of these terrible things that are going to destroy people's lives. All of that flows in one direction. It has always been that way. We don't just have a two-tiered system of justice. We have a two-tiered system of social interaction as well. They are blaming the victim for the violence perpetrated against him. And I thought that they were committed to the moral principle that that was wrong. It was only 6 or 7 years ago where you could basically be imprisoned for suggesting that a woman making a Me Too claim maybe shouldn't have gone and gotten wasted in a hotel room with a guy at 3 a.m. But let's get back to Ryan Routh, who was featured in a very odd Twitter post from May 1st, 2022 by an account that goes by Save Azov. This video is a message to the world from the Mariupol defenders. They are grateful for our support and ask us to keep on fighting. Thank you to everyone who supports the defenders of Mariupol and raises the issue of Mariupol at the international level. Mariupol is Ukraine flag emoji, hashtag save Mariupol. Here he is being interviewed by Newsweek back in 2022.
Tell me who you are and why are you here?
56 from the U.S., from North Carolina originally, so live in Hawaii now, so flew all the way from Hawaii here. So the question as far as why I'm here, to me, a lot of the other conflicts are gray, but this conflict is definitely black and white. This is about good versus evil. This is a storybook, any movie we've ever watched, this is definitely evil against good. I mean, we're battling a situation here where the Ukrainians and the rest of the world are caring and kind and generous and unselfish and take care of one another. And it's just a matter of, we need to stand up for that. That is the most important thing in the world, is just to show human beings that we're kind and we're caring and that we take care of one another and that the world is united so that we feed each other and make sure that, we all move forward as one collective whole unit. So, we feel the pain of one country's failure and their conflicts, and we enjoy the successes of other countries that are doing good, and we all work together. And for some reason, Russia does not grasp this concept that we're all one unit, and we have to get along and work together and be normal human beings. This is 2022. We have to work together. It seems asinine that we have a leader in a country that does not understand the concept of being unselfish and being generous and being kind and just the basic moral values that are required by human beings these days.
So the guy is in a highly produced propaganda commercial for the Azov Battalion in Mariupol. He's interviewed by Newsweek. He's interviewed by Semaphore. And he was also, apparently, convicted for weapons charges and the possession of a weapon of mass destruction 20 years ago. Whose radar wasn't this guy on? And for the record, there's a rumor going around that he was in a BlackRock commercial like the Thomas Matthew Crooks character was, but I think that that's a mistake that has just been repeated so many times that people think it's real. People dug into his social media. He has an X, formerly Twitter, account and a Facebook account that has since been scrubbed. Before it was, someone found a post from a year ago where Routh posted pictures of himself and wrote, "In D.C. and Kyiv to provide soldiers for the war effort." Over on Twitter on the 27th of February, 2022, just after Putin launched his very brutal invasion, he responded to a hashtag Close the Sky post with, "Please promote a global civilian army. Beg everyone to come to Ukraine and fight. I am willing to come to Ukraine and fight and die as an American to be an example for others. But I need your help with a media campaign to encourage others to come also. Please respond." And he posted a phone number. You'll remember the hashtag Close the Sky campaign was about getting a no-fly zone set up over Ukraine, a move where the result would be the breakout of full-on war between Russia and the West in Ukraine. A few more posts. March 5th, 2020. I was not supporting Bernie, but now I am, as Sleepy Joe stands for nothing. No plans, no ideas, just as limp as Hillary. Bernie, give them hell. Fight to the death. On April 22nd of this year, he tagged @POTUS and said your campaign should be called something like KADAF, Keep America Democratic and Free. Trump's should be MASA, Make Americans Slaves Again, Master. Wow. Democracy is on the ballot and we cannot lose. We cannot afford to fail. The world is counting on us to show the way. On July 16th, @Joe Biden, you should visit the victims in the hospital of the Trump rally victims and attend the funeral of the firemen that died. Trump certainly never would. Show the world what real leaders do. And on July 17th, Kamala Harris, you and Biden should visit the injured people in the hospital from the Trump rally and attend the funeral of the murdered firemen. Trump will never do anything for them. Show the world what compassion and humanity is all about. And once again, he leaves a phone number. Zero Hedge breaks down some highlights of Routh's various media appearances. From the article, what's startling is that corporate media such as New York Times, Financial Times, Semaphore, and others paraded the shooter around with a number of quotes about Ukraine and Taiwan. From the Financial Times, it's a pretty big yard, but the front bank is completely full. Ryan Routh, an American volunteer who started the memorial last year, said, "There may be 10,000 at this point. Flags of the fallen is what I've been calling it." Routh, a former construction worker who lives in Hawaii, is one of the thousands of foreigners who, after seeing news reports about the invasion, traveled into Ukraine in early 2022 to volunteer as fighters or medics. A quote from Semaphore. Most of the Ukrainian authorities do not want these soldiers, said Ryan Routh, head of the International Volunteer Center in Ukraine, a private organization which helps foreigners seeking to assist the war effort connecting with military units and aid groups. I have had partners meeting with Ukraine's Ministry of Defense every week and still have not been able to get them to agree to issue one single visa. End quote. From the New York Times. With Legion growth stalling, Ryan Routh, a former construction worker from Greensboro, North Carolina, is seeking recruits from among Afghan soldiers who fled the Taliban. Mr. Routh, who spent several months in Ukraine last year, said he plans to move them, in some cases illegally, from Pakistan and Iran to Ukraine. He said dozens had expressed interest. We can probably purchase some passports through Pakistan since it's such a corrupt country, he said in an interview from Washington. And according to Taiwan News, he was prepared to go help Taiwan as well. This is the Associated Press this morning. Man accused of trying to kill Trump wrote a book urging Iran to assassinate the ex-president. Ryan Wesley Routh portrayed himself online as a man who built housing for homeless people in Hawaii, tried to recruit fighters for Ukraine to defend itself against Russia, and described his support and then disdain for Donald Trump, even urging Iran to kill him. You are free to assassinate Trump, Routh wrote of Iran in an apparently self-published book in 2023, Ukraine's Unwinnable War, which described the former president as a fool and a buffoon for both the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot and the tremendous blunder of leaving the Iran nuclear deal. Routh wrote he once voted for Trump and must take part of the blame for the, quote, child we elected for our next president that ended up being brainless, end quote. Sounds like this guy did more than the recommended dose of the Lincoln Project back in 2020. Back to the AP. Through his voluminous online footprint, public records, news interviews, and videos, a picture emerged of Routh as a man with a criminal past, plenty of outrage, and views ranging from the left to the right, including support for Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Nikki Haley, and Trump. It's so weird because Trump is the only one of those people who is not on the left. Nikki Haley is a neocon. Neocons are descended from Trotsky. It is not on the right or of the right just because it has the word conservatism in there. The neo part indicates it's something else. Regardless, it is nothing more than militant regime communism under a different name. They note that he's donated a number of times, though very small amounts, to Democrats since 2019 and wanted Donald Trump to write an executive order to punish police after the George Floyd incident. Dmitry Medvedev, who was the president of the Russian Federation from 2008 to 2012 and is still affiliated with the Russian government, he is deputy chair of the Security Council, wrote, I wonder what would happen if it turned out that the failed new Trump shooter Routh, who recruited mercenaries for the Ukrainian army, was himself hired by the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv for this assassination attempt. All right, so let's pause with the Ryan Routh details, the details of the almost potential shooting, attempted assassination, who knows what, and try to reset our framing here a little bit. I talked about this morning on Telegram and Truth Social. I wrote, whenever an event occurs that has the potential to get everyone back on the same page inside the false reality, there are things to think about rather than simply trying to parse the details of what might turn out to be a complete and total fiction. And I'm talking about any event that is designed in a narrative sense to get everyone back on the same page. It could be a quote unquote natural disaster or a quote unquote cyber attack or a quote unquote market crash. At some point, you got to start wondering if all of these massive disasters are just caused by the same people. And once you start thinking that, you find out, oh, yeah, they totally are. But anything like that, or a debate, or an election, or the kidnapping of a white girl in college, or OJ driving down the freeway. It's fine and appropriate to look over things so you have an idea of what's going on, but you don't want to get bogged down in parsing all of the details. It's important to process the information with the same epistemology, using the same discernment and the same skepticism that you'd apply to anything else. And it's too often the case that with these major events that trigger people's emotions, they leave all that aside, especially if the narrative seems to favor their side. They'll invest in all the details so they can prove over and over again, to whatever degree necessary, that everyone else is the bad guy. It's motivated thinking triggered by an emotional reaction. That's a bad road to go down intellectually. It's going to lead to a lot of bad consequences and bad outcomes in one's thinking. And even just from a practical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to obsess over all the details of an undeveloped story when you can't retrieve those details yourself. It's not as if you memorize all the news, then you can map it appropriately. Somewhere down at the bottom of that, there's going to be a correct answer that maps faithfully onto reality prime, onto any picture of the real world. If the event itself is fake, or it's not faithfully reported, or if all the reporting attempts to skew the meaning of the key facts, then what you have is some sort of fiction. I've talked about this many times. I talk about how people waste all their time pursuing the granular details of a complete and total fiction. It would be like knowing absolutely everything about Game of Thrones. You might make yourself an expert in the details of Game of Thrones, but that doesn't make Game of Thrones real. So rather than just jumping in, assuming that the stories are true or mostly true, or even attempting to be true, and then trying somehow to coherently navigate your way to a full and complete picture of what actually happened, there are some other things to think about that might help to better frame the issue. And so I listed a few of them. Number one, who is out front delivering the official story? Well, yesterday it turned out to be Sean Hannity, Lindsay Graham, and the New York Post. So Murdoch outlets and one of the most insane, unhinged, likely fully controlled and fully compromised neocon warmongers the country has ever known. The guy wants war everywhere, certainly in Ukraine. In fact, he wanted war in Ukraine so much that he was over there in 2014 with John McCain and Amy Klobuchar and those same Azov neo-Nazis. John McCain famously said, bomb, 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 Iran. And that was Lindsey Graham's best friend. So we've got Ukraine and Iran right in Ryan Routh's wheelhouse. He wanted Iran to assassinate Donald Trump. And we had reports following Trump assassination event number 1 that Iran wanted to assassinate American politicians. All the Con Inc. media and influencers immediately jumped onto this story. The entire info op just went full bore right into action right away. It's a perfect opportunity for all of those neocons, all the Con Inc. cucks who supported Ron DeSantis and the rest, to let us know that they're really on our side on this one. At times like this, you got to come together and unify, which means you have to unify with them. You recognize that they really are your heroes. Sure, they've totally directed the hate movement at you many times over the last 9 years, including and especially through that fake primary season. And they definitely lied about election fraud and covered up our rigged and stolen elections on behalf of the Uniparty, on behalf of Joe Biden. But besides that, they're totally on our side. In fact, they're going to go hardcore after this would-be Trump assassin. And once they do that for you, then you have to remember who the real conservatives are. It's them. And oh yeah, Ron DeSantis in Florida is going to take care of the whole investigation. Last night he posted the state of Florida will be conducting its own investigation regarding the attempted assassination at Trump International Golf Club. The people deserve the truth about the would-be assassin and how he was able to get within 500 yards of the former president and current GOP nominee. That's all Ron says. But why would anyone trust Ron DeSantis to get to the bottom of this on behalf of Donald Trump? People still cling desperately to the belief that Ron DeSantis is kayfabe, and maybe there's some small possibility that's true, but the movement developed around him wasn't. That was a paid info op designed to get Donald Trump out of politics permanently after covering up the rigged and stolen election on behalf of Joe Biden didn't work. Again, we're just supposed to pretend that because these people have little R's next to their names and pretended to be our best friends on TV for 2 years, we should ignore the fact that they supported the usurpation of the country. Ron DeSantis is a standard uniparty right governor who was a media darling for a while, and maybe nothing more. Why is it that all of the people who just last week were saying that Donald Trump blew it in the debate, he took the bait from Kamala and lost his cool, he didn't perform well? The people who are convincing us we're in a 50-50 country, this is a close election, it's going to be a real election. The people out there who are always trying to correct Donald Trump's language and how he's going to act and the way that MAGA needs to respect the conservative establishment, all the people who are trying to change Donald Trump's messaging in the middle of an information war, all of those people are immediately going as hard as they can pro-Trump in the wake of Assassination event number 2. It's very odd to say the least. Number 2 on my list. Do aspects of the official story suggest interpretations that support prior regime narratives? And we can use Assassination event number 2 for examples of that. The Uniparty Left is telling us that this is a result of Trump's rhetoric. They're saying it's part of this trend of political violence in this country that they blame on MAGA, despite political violence being a feature almost entirely of the Uniparty Left and regularly encouraged by the Uniparty Left. It has always been that way. And I've gone through a number of ways that people on the Uniparty right are doing the same thing. They get to burnish their reputations on the cheap without taking a bold stand for anything. They get to performatively go through Ukraine bad because now that's safe. They don't actually have to make a real argument about Russia. It's just that we've paid Ukraine too much money. Routh was said to be anti-Israel and pro-Palestine, so they absolutely love that. There's talk about Iran, and that excites them. And now they're all morally justified in recommending that Trump silence himself. Hey, just stay at Mar-a-Lago. Stay quiet for a couple of months. That'll be the best you can do in your campaign in this very close election. Number 3, is there an immediate push for government action, and to what end? Think about any school shooting event. The first thing we hear from the Uniparty Left is about how guns are a problem, and we need an assault weapons ban, or we need a buyback program like the kind Kamala Harris has supported before she stopped. It's something they had on their agenda that they believe this new incident helps to justify. When will these shootings end? We can't have another shooting. The only way to stop shootings is to get rid of all the guns. Therefore, we need to get rid of all the guns, or else we're going to keep having these shootings. And right now, while everyone's emotions are high, that's the best time to hold everyone hostage until, quote unquote, something is done. Last week, Politico ran this headline: Zelensky's power grab is bad for Ukraine. The subheadline: the war has done nothing to still the president's populist impatience with the complexities of governing, and it's playing against the country's strengths. The comedic actor banned political parties and has had the country under martial law. His presidential term expired almost 4 months ago. Now we're being told he's a populist? And of course, all of this is because they don't seem to have control over Volodymyr Zelensky. Not anymore. If they ever did to begin with, it should at least be considered that they might not have. Ukraine has been blamed for a number of terrorist incidents over the past few years. There is plenty going on in Ukraine that the regime would love to put on one person and then send that person out to sea. And they are more than happy to do that with Volodymyr Zelensky. It seems like they're at least attempting to move him out of the picture and wash their hands of the whole thing. If he's gone, then he can be replaced. And then Ukraine can make their comeback. They can blame everything on Zelensky. And maybe then they'll be able to fire those long-range missiles they keep begging to fire at Russia, despite the fact that that would cause a massive conflict, which Putin says could lead to a nuclear conflict. Politico wrote, so far, international and domestic media have largely echoed government spin on the matter, claiming this to be the biggest overhaul since Russia invaded Ukraine. But in truth, it isn't much of a revamp at all. It's simply a repositioning of some of the dramatis personae that's been presented as something bigger than it is, the officials said, asking to remain anonymous in order to speak more frankly. They're talking about some turnover in the quote-unquote Zelensky inner circle. It's been presented as a major overhaul, but they didn't get their guys in, and it's not enough. A couple paragraphs later, Ukraine's leader has been piquing expectations of a major change in government since spring, with Zelensky and his aides trying to lift flagging spirits amid declining personal opinion ratings and a fatigued nation more openly questioning his leadership. Hence the dramatic cross-border incursion launched into Russia's Kursk region last month. Again, the Russians frame that as a terrorist act led by Ukraine's quote-unquote Western allies. These are narratives that support prior narratives, which then recommend certain government actions. Even Ron DeSantis taking over the investigation in Florida was something pushed immediately by the Republican establishment and then announced by DeSantis. A major event happens, and then various uniparty factions push things they were already pushing as the proper response to this new event that has just occurred. In regard to discernment and skepticism, I wrote, if we know the details are murky at best, the story should be rejected in its entirety. If the case cannot be made with direct, irrefutable evidence, not videos or documents, the case is not made. Videos and documents are fine as information among other information. They are not in themselves compelling arguments. We have videos purported to be of Thomas Matthew Crooks, but there's no way of verifying that. And his body was disposed of. The guy had no social media history, and his parents didn't even seem to know who he was. We're forced to accept some grainy video and some strange-looking pictures and the word of people who should never be trusted about anything. What direct evidence do we have of anything concerning Trump assassination event number 2? Well, there's certainly no direct evidence. There are murky details about stories that shift and change and don't really make sense when it comes to what happened at Mar-a-Lago. And then there's some video of Routh being stopped and arrested that MSNBC is playing. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying it's not possible that any of that stuff is real. I'm not saying it's possible that this event didn't happen. I'm just saying that all of these details are murky at best, and until we have a much clearer picture, no one should be deciding anything about what should be done. But that's not how our culture operates, and that's certainly not how our media operates. It's like a contest for people to describe exactly how to handle this situation. Oh, Trump needs to hunker down at Mar-a-Lago for 2 months. Ron DeSantis needs to investigate. This is all Ukraine's fault. We should go to war with Iran. Trump needs to tone down his rhetoric. Are any of those things justified based on a set of murky details, none of which can be confirmed? Imagine making an important decision in your own personal life on a set of totally murky, unconfirmed details. Like imagine I said to you, hey, do you want a new job? What would you say? You wouldn't say yes. And unless you really loved your current job, you probably wouldn't say no either. You would say, what's the job? And then you would keep asking questions until you had enough details that you were able to make a good, responsible, informed decision. But that's not what you're being encouraged to do. You're being encouraged to form beliefs and take actions on virtually no verifiable information whatsoever. The only calculus is we like Trump. They say something bad happened to Trump. In response, we need to do XYZ. That's not even a serious way to approach things. Let's continue. Anyone recommending you perform a certain behavior or think a certain thing is overtly attempting to exploit you and should be regarded with contempt. One of the major things to understand about this entire process is that we have been exploited throughout our lives, in great part due to this information operation and the way that these sorts of stories are used to direct belief and behavior. Understanding that that is the enemy's primary tactic, everything they recommend should be rejected out of hand until you have enough information to reach a conclusion on your own. And if that happens to coincide with what they recommend, fine. But we imagine ourselves as less informed than the people who are informing us, as if they've gone out and vetted this information. They've found it on their own. They would stand behind it. These people don't stand behind anything. I wrote anyone pandering for follows on X, formerly Twitter, and other legacy apps with quote unquote breaking or any of that other nonsense should be mocked. They should. Influencers are not breaking news. They're seeing something online and then they are publicizing what they saw. It's clickbait almost every time, and very rarely are they actually breaking news. So it's also dishonest. The point is that we must break the ability of the machine to control us, of the media to control us. It is okay to wait for more details. It's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to understand that there is nothing they won't lie about. There is nothing they won't fake. It is also important to realize that Donald Trump is engaged in a high-level chess match in an information war for all the marbles. Him going along with one side of a narrative temporarily does not make that narrative true. So let's return to Ryan Routh. From what we are told, he sounds like the perfect patsy. A lot of political posts. He thinks it's a battle between good and evil. He's recommended for Iran to assassinate Trump. He wanted to go over to Ukraine to fight that evil, those evil Russians. What a history he has. And I thought it was interesting that Morning Joe brought up the Paul Pelosi Hammer Time attack because the Ryan Routh bio and the approach taken to fleshing him out as a character is a bit reminiscent of what they did with David DePop. You might remember that initially we were told he was going there to attack Nancy Pelosi. This was a totally random occurrence. He didn't know Paul Pelosi before the event. Online, he had a history of posting COVID-19 conspiracies and anti-Semitic ideas and QAnon and Pizzagate theories and claims about election fraud and beliefs about government corruption. How could he post those things? He sounds like some kind of lunatic that just knows the truth about what the government does. But all of that was designed to make him look like a MAGA extremist, just another MAGA extremist going after those poor Democrats who are just trying to save the world on behalf of everyone. And then it turned out that his internet history went back about 2 months, like it had just been created 2 months before that quote-unquote attack. That was the proof that he was a right-wing extremist, except it also just so happened that he lived in a house with BLM signs on it and was a potentially or sometimes gay drug addict and nudist who was known not only to media outlets, but somehow had a relationship with San Francisco's pro-pedophilia California Congressman Scott Wiener. Like Thomas Crooks and now like Ryan Routh, there are many reasons to believe, hey, this might not be a real person. There's something very uncanny and unnerving about this entire story. It doesn't really make sense with how humans operate. It's like this character, in the way they describe him, was simply created for the purposes of this story. And that would be crazy if it wasn't actually something that the intelligence agencies have been doing for decades. Is this really another lone gunman? Just a nut who went out and did this all on his own? Any rational person should find it almost impossible to believe this. But many people don't find it impossible. They just go with all of it because this is what they are told. And their emotions have been triggered. They're in a state of fear or anger about the fact that people are trying to take out Donald Trump. And how about this from the Daily Mail? Son of alleged would-be assassin Ryan Wesley Routh says his dad hates Trump like, quote, all reasonable people, end quote, but he's never owned a gun and wouldn't do anything batshit crazy. Routh's son, Orrin Routh, reached by DailyMail.com shortly after Sunday's shooting, said this was the first he'd heard of the alleged assassination attempt. This was the first I heard about it, the 35-year-old exclusively told DailyMail.com. Was my father shot or injured? He said his father hates Trump, as every reasonable person does. I don't like Trump either, the son added. But he said his dad is not a violent person and couldn't believe his father would target the president. He's my dad, and all he's had is a couple traffic tickets, as far as I know, the son said. That's crazy. I know my dad and love my dad, but that's nothing like him. Routh said his father, who had no military experience, said he traveled to Ukraine following Russia's 2022 invasion to help volunteer and provide aid to those affected. Routh moved to Hawaii a few years back and was living with his longtime girlfriend. He said he didn't know his father was even in Florida. He said he was at the beach, but I thought that meant the Outer Banks in Hawaii, the son said. I didn't ask him for more information because we've had a falling out. We've grown apart. He wouldn't explain the nature of their falling out, but still spoke highly of his father. He's not a violent person, he said. He's a hard worker and a great dad. He's a great dude, a nice guy, and has worked his whole effing life. Asked whether his father owned a gun, he replied, not that I know of. I've never known him to own a gun or known him to do anything batshit like this, the son added. He said his father works as a general contractor building small homes in Hawaii and previously owned a roofing company. He abruptly ended the call saying he needed to inquire about what actually happened. Later, in a rambling text, Routh appeared to justify his father's actions. Quote, I hate this game every 4 years and think that we all do. And if my father wants to be a martyr to how broken and disassociated the process has become from the real problems and practical solutions, then that's his choice. I'm not saying that's what he's done or what he's about. That's just my own rant being fed up with it all for my entire adult life. South Park said it best, every 4 years, we're forced to choose between a turd sandwich and a giant douche, and it all stays effed in the same ways by different degrees, and we're all exhausted and embarrassed by it all. So what are we supposed to make of that? Are we getting a false story about Ryan Routh? Is he a patsy that was just selected because he has that history that would lead people to suspect that he might be capable of doing something like this and might be motivated of his own volition? Or is it possible that his son just doesn't know him at all? Like Thomas Matthew Crooks's parents, is it possible that his online presence has been manipulated in some way? Is it possible that his son had no idea about these major charges back in the early 2000s against his own father, possession of a weapon of mass destruction, and his 35-year-old son doesn't know anything about it? I would suggest to you that that is not possible. Now, as the event was unfolding yesterday, the first reports we heard, as I said, were from Sean Hannity, the New York Post, Lindsay Graham, and Con Inc. There was also a press conference led by Sheriff Rick Bradshaw, along with a representative of the Secret Service and a man from the FBI's Miami field office, giving the official story. Today, we got to hear from the sheriff of Martin County, Will Snyder. That's the county where Ryan Routh was arrested. Here's what he had to say.
Did he have any, to your knowledge, any ties to Martin County or the Treasure Coast?
Yeah, to my knowledge, does he have any ties to Martin County? I think the answer, to my knowledge, the answer is no, I have no knowledge. I think what we're finding out is he's not from this area, which of course raises the bigger question is, how does a guy from not here get all the way to Trump International, realize that the president, former president of the United States, is golfing and is able to get a rifle in that vicinity? I think that's the question the FBI, the Secret Service are laser focused on today. Is this guy part of a conspiracy? Is he a lone gunman? If he's a lone gunman, President Trump is that much safer because we have him. But if he's part of a conspiracy, then this whole thing really takes on a very ominous tone.
And that's where we are, because Trump's round of golf yesterday was not on his normal schedule. And I'm not sure what to make of this, but the pictures from yesterday, purportedly of Donald Trump on the golf course yesterday, featured Donald Trump in a suit. But the question is, regardless, how would Ryan Routh have known Donald Trump would be golfing at that time on that day? The speculation is that message would have come from the inside. Someone would have known and would have sent a message out that eventually reached Ryan Routh that would have caused him to go to that location at that time. What are we supposed to make of this at this point? I have no idea, but there's no way I'm going to believe anything from any of these untrustworthy sources and then react in any way they recommend I react, because it's obviously part of a bigger conspiracy. And for that matter, assassination event number 1 was too. But no one ever got to the bottom of that. We just heard it was some squirrely little dude whose parents didn't even know him, whose body was then cremated. We were told it was the Secret Service's fault. There was a hearing, some resignations, and apparently Richard Blumenthal knows exactly what happened, and it would shock the nation. But he's just not allowed to tell us. Not yet. We're not allowed to know until our betters get their stories straight. And then they'll give us a revised version of the central narrative and tell us, if we question it, we're conspiracy theorists. Now, I was hoping not to spend the whole episode on this. I wasn't sure if that would actually work. But there was some other interesting stuff happening over the weekend. The affidavit purportedly from the ABC News whistleblower about Kamala Harris getting an undue advantage in the debate last week is out. There was a big report from the New York Times about how Supreme Court Justice John Roberts was somehow putting his thumb on the scale in some of the Trump cases from earlier this year. And Trump supposedly is having a Twitter Spaces event tonight to discuss his new DeFi crypto project, World Liberty Financial, that he has suggested in some way will be an affront to the big banks. And so we'll see if that happens. We'll see what emerges. And so we'll get into some of that stuff tomorrow. I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.